clinking of crystal glasses and loud laughter echoed through the massive dining room of the Atlanta mansion. The air smelled of roasted turkey and expensive sage dressing, but to Jeremiah the atmosphere felt entirely suffocating. He stood near the archway of the kitchen, quietly holding a small wooden box wrapped in plain brown paper. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Vernon, wearing a tailored silk suit and holding a glass of aged bourbon. Vernon was Nia's father, and tonight he was making sure everyone in the room knew he was the king of the castle. Andre Jeremiah's own son sat near Vernon, nodding along to whatever grand story the older man was telling. Jeremiah adjusted the collar of his simple flannel shirt. He'd bought it 3 years ago, not because he could not afford a new one, but because he saw no reason to replace perfectly good fabric. Nia walked past him, carrying a silver platter of sweet potatoes, and gave him a tight, obligatory smile before turning her attention back to her father. "Look who finally decided to join us," Vernon announced loudly, his voice booming over the soft jazz playing in the background. "Come on in, Jeremiah. Grab a seat near the back." Jeremiah walked forward slowly, feeling the eyes of 20 guests burning into his worn boots. He approached the table and looked at his 8-year-old grandson, Jordan. "I made this for you, Jordan," Jeremiah said softly, extending the brown paper package. "It is a wooden train set hand-carved, just like we talked about." Jordan reached out, his eyes lighting up with genuine excitement, but Vernon intercepted. Vernon snatched the package from Jeremiah's hands, weighing it with a theatrical scoff. "Hand-carved." Vernon laughed, shaking his head. "Oh, Jeremiah, that is very folksy of you, but we are well past the age of whittling wood on the porch. Jordan needs educational tech, not scraps from the backyard." Vernon tossed the package carelessly onto a side table where it landed with a dull thud. Jeremiah kept his face perfectly still, breathing in, slowly letting the insult wash over him, without reacting. He looked at Andre, waiting for his son to say something, anything to defend him. Andre just stared down at his plate, suddenly very interested in his cranberry sauce. Vernon tapped his spoon against his crystal glass, demanding the room's full attention. Now that we are all gathered, Vernon began, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. "I have a very special announcement to make for the immediate family. I know how stressful this year has been, especially with little Jordan's therapy, so I've taken it upon myself to treat my daughter, my son-in-law, and my wonderful grandkids to a proper holiday." Vernon paused, looking around the room, to ensure all eyes were on him before delivering the final blow. "I have booked a fully paid luxury cabin in Aspen for Christmas week," Vernon declared, smiling smugly. 5 nights private chef ski lessons, the whole 9 yards. It is going to be a beautiful, intimate trip, just for the core family to bond and recharge. The room erupted in applause and excited gasps. Nia ran over and hugged her father, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Oh, Dad, you are too generous," Nia cried out, kissing his cheek. Andre looked up, smiling widely, clapping his hands together. "Thank you, Vernon," Andre said, his voice loud and clear. "We really needed this. You have no idea how much this means to us." Jeremiah stood frozen, the words echoing in his mind. Just for the core family. He was Andre's father. He was Jordan's grandfather. Yet he was standing in the very house he secretly paid for, listening to another man exclude him from the holiday, and his own son was applauding. Vernon looked over at Jeremiah, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Do not worry about a thing," Jeremiah Vernon said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "You can come over on the 27th, maybe, bring some leftovers, have a quiet afternoon." The heat in the room seemed to rise, pressing against Jeremiah's chest. He looked at the crystal chandelier hanging above the table, sparkling with a cold, unforgiving light. He thought about the secret checks he wrote every single month. He thought about the $40,000 he had quietly wired to the speech therapy clinic, ensuring that Jordan could find his voice, while Vernon took all the credit. He thought about the mortgage payments he covered whenever Andre complained about things being too tight. Jeremiah had always believed that true love was silent, that real support did not require a parade or an audience. He had stayed in the background out of respect for his son's pride, allowing Andre to feel like the provider. But standing here watching Vernon parade around like a savior, Jeremiah realized his quiet grace had been mistaken for weakness. He looked at Jordan, who was now staring at the side table, his eyes fixed on the discarded wooden toy. Jeremiah wanted to walk over, pick up the box, and tell his grandson the truth. He wanted to scream that Vernon was nothing but a loud, empty suit. But Jeremiah was a man of immense control. He had built an empire from the dirt up, and you do not build an empire by losing your temper at a dinner party. You do it by observing, planning, and striking when the time is right. "Are you going to sit down?" Jeremiah Nia asked, her tone laced with irritation. "We are trying to serve the main course and you are hovering in the walkway." Her words were sharp, dismissing him like he was hired help who had overstayed his welcome. Jeremiah did not flinch, and he did not raise his voice. He simply looked at Nia, taking in the irritation on her face, and then he looked at his son. Andre was a grown man, but right now, he looked like a frightened child, hiding behind his father-in-law. Jeremiah looked around the massive dining room, staring at the crown molding and the imported hardwood floors. It was a beautiful home, and it was entirely paid for by a silent trust that Jeremiah controlled. Every single month, Jeremiah quietly transferred thousands of dollars, ensuring this roof stayed over his grandson. Standing here tonight, he realized none of it mattered to them. They did not respect the foundation because they never had to pour the concrete themselves. "I am not hovering, Nia," Jeremiah said quietly, his voice carrying a calm, heavy weight. "I was just giving my grandson his gift." Vernon chuckled from the head of the table, swirling his expensive bourbon. "Do not make a scene, Jeremiah," Vernon said smoothly. "We are all family here, and we just want to enjoy a peaceful Thanksgiving dinner without any heavy tension. You know how sensitive Nia gets when things are awkward." Nia sighed loudly, crossing her arms over her expensive silk blouse. "Dad is right, Jeremiah," she said, her tone cold and sharp. "We really just want to celebrate the Aspen trip tonight and focus on the positive. Maybe it would be best if you headed out early so Dad can make his toast and we can start carving the turkey. We can drop off a plate for you tomorrow if you want." Jeremiah felt a cold, hard clarity settle over him. He was being dismissed. He was being told to leave his own house, the house he owned on paper, so a loud man could play king for the night. He looked at Andre one last time, hoping to see a spark of defiance or a shred of loyalty. Andre, Jeremiah said evenly, testing the water one final time. "Are you all right with this?" Andre swallowed hard, his eyes darting from his wife to his father-in-law and finally to the floor. "It is just for tonight, Dad," Andre mumbled, barely loud enough to hear. "Nia has been stressed and Vernon is only in town for a few days. We will see you on the 27th, okay?" The betrayal was quiet, but it was absolute. Jeremiah did not argue and he did not plead his case. He knew that arguing with entitlement was like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "I understand," Jeremiah said softly. "I understand perfectly." He turned his back on the lavish table and walked over to the side table. He picked up the plain brown package holding the wooden train set. He walked over to Jordan, who was watching him with wide, sad eyes. "Be good, Jordan," Jeremiah whispered, placing a rough, calloused hand on the boy. "I will see you soon and keep practicing your reading just like we do on Saturdays." Jordan nodded, looking down at his lap. "Bye, Grandpa," the boy whispered softly. Jeremiah stood up straight, adjusting his flannel collar one last time. He did not look back at Vernon, who was already raising his glass to make his grand toast. He did not look at Nia, who was visibly relaxing now that the poor relative was leaving. And he certainly did not look at Andre, because looking at his son right now would break the last piece of his heart. Jeremiah walked out of the dining room, his boots making heavy rhythmic sounds on the hardwood floor. He walked down the long hallway, passing the framed family photos where he was conspicuously absent. He reached the heavy oak front door, turned the brass handle, and stepped out into the crisp Atlanta evening. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing away the warmth, the laughter, and the illusion of his family. The crisp autumn air hit Jeremiah in the face as he walked down the long, winding driveway. He listened to the faint sound of laughter spilling from the dining room windows. He kept walking past the expensive cars parked along the curb. He passed the shiny, leased sports car belonging to Vernon. He passed the luxury SUV that Nia drove every day. He reached the end of the cul-de-sac, standing under the dim glow of a street lamp, letting the silence settle around him. Jeremiah did not walk toward a bus stop, and he did not look for an old, worn-out truck. He stood perfectly still, breathing in the cool air, waiting in the shadows. Less than 2 minutes later, a sleek black town car glided around the corner, its headlights cutting through the dark street. The car pulled up silently beside him, and the tinted rear window rolled down. The driver, a sharp man in a dark suit, stepped out immediately, opening the heavy rear door. "Good evening, sir," the driver said quietly, bowing his head with deep respect. "Evening," David Jeremiah replied, stepping into the plush leather interior of the vehicle. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, blocking out the noise of the suburban neighborhood completely. Jeremiah settled into the seat, pulling his phone from the pocket of his flannel shirt. He bypassed his regular everyday contacts and dialed a highly secure number routed directly to a private wealth management firm in Chicago. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered the call. "Good evening, Mr. Vance," the voice said, sounding alert and ready despite the holiday hour. "How can we assist you tonight?" "It is time to make some adjustments," Jeremiah said, his voice calm, but hard as forged steel. "I need you to execute a full freeze on the blind trust associated with Andre and Nia." "Understood, sir," the voice replied, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the line. "What specific parameters are we adjusting tonight?" "All of them," Jeremiah stated, plainly staring out the dark window. "Stop the auto payments for the speech therapy clinic effective immediately. Cancel the recurring deposits going into the personal checking account for Andre. And I need you to contact the holding company, the one that owns the deed to their Atlanta property." The typing paused for a fraction of a second. "The mortgage, sir?" the voice asked carefully. "Yes." Jeremiah said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at the house he had just left. "The grace period is absolutely over. Initiate immediate collection on the mortgage in full. If they cannot pay the balance, begin the foreclosure process by tomorrow morning. They want to act independent, so we are going to let them feel the full weight of their independence." "Consider it done, sir," the wealth manager replied efficiently. "The accounts will be locked within the hour, and the legal notices will be drafted for morning delivery. Is there anything else?" "No," Jeremiah said, leaning his head back against the soft leather seat. "That will be all for tonight." He ended the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He looked at the small wooden train set resting on the seat beside him. He'd spent weeks carving it, shaping the wood, with his own hands, pouring his love into every tiny detail. They had called it a scrap from the backyard. They had laughed at his modest clothes and dismissed his quiet presence, truly believing he was nothing but a poor old man who needed their charity and patience. "Drive," David Jeremiah instructed softly, not looking back at the brightly lit house. The black town car pulled away from the curb, slipping smoothly into the quiet Atlanta night. The first domino had just been pushed, and by tomorrow morning the entire false foundation of their entitled lives would come crashing down around them. The morning sun pierced through the massive bay windows of the Atlanta mansion, but the warmth did not reach Andre. He sat at the marble kitchen island, rubbing his temples, nursing a mild headache from Vernon and his expensive bourbon. Across town in the high-end shopping district of Buckhead, Nia was already in her element. She stood at the sleek glass counter of a luxury boutique, her arms draped with silk blouses and thick cashmere sweaters for the upcoming Aspen trip. The sales associate, a young woman with a polite and practiced smile, took the items and swiped Nia's platinum card. The credit card machine beeped a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Declined," the associate whispered, gently leaning forward so the other wealthy patrons would not overhear the embarrassment. Nia laughed a short, dismissive sound. "Run it again," she ordered, waving her hand effortlessly. "It is just a security block because I'm buying so much today." The associate nodded and swiped the card a second time. The red light flashed instantly. "I am sorry, ma'am. It says you must contact your institution," the associate said, her smile tightening at the edges. Nia felt a sudden flush of heat rise in her cheeks. She dug into her designer leather purse, pulling out a backup gold card, and slapped it onto the glass counter. "Try that one," she snapped, feeling the judgmental eyes of a woman standing next to her. The associate swiped the gold card. Beep. Declined. Nia stared at the little digital screen, her heart suddenly beating much faster than normal. "That is impossible," Nia said, her voice rising slightly in the quiet store. "My father just paid for a luxury ski chalet. We have plenty of limits on these accounts. I need to call my husband. Just hold these items behind the counter." Back at the house, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed loudly through the quiet foyer. Andre groaned, setting down his coffee mug, and walked slowly to the entrance. He opened the heavy wood door, expecting a late holiday package delivery. Instead, a stern-looking man in a cheap gray suit handed him a thick manila envelope attached to a metal clipboard. "Sign here," the process server demanded, pointing a pen to a yellow line. Andre signed his name sloppily, taking the heavy envelope. He closed the door, tearing the top off the thick paper. He pulled out a stack of legal documents printed on heavy bond paper. The bold letters at the very top of the page made his stomach drop completely. Notice of immediate default and foreclosure. Andre blinked rapidly, thinking it was a terrible mistake. He walked back to the kitchen, spreading the crisp papers out on the cold marble island. He read the first paragraph, his eyes scanning the dense, threatening legal jargon. The document stated that the blind corporate trust, the exact entity that had quietly held their mortgage for 5 years, was officially dissolved. The grace period for missed payments was permanently revoked. A lump sum of $800,000 was due in 7 days, or the property would be seized by the bank. Andre felt all the air leave his lungs at once. He grabbed the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning stark white. He reached for his phone, dialing the emergency number for the trust administrator, a number he had only ever used twice in 5 whole years. The line rang once, and a pre-recorded message immediately played. "The number you have reached is no longer in service," the robotic voice stated flatly. He opened his mobile banking app, his fingers trembling slightly over the screen. He checked his personal checking account, the one that magically replenished itself every single time he overspent on a new car lease or a fancy vacation. The balance displayed was exactly 0. A bright red notification at the top of the screen read, "Account frozen by primary account holder." His phone vibrated violently in his hand, flashing Nia on the bright screen. He answered it, pressing the phone to his ear, completely unable to speak a single word. Andre Nia hissed through the speaker, her voice tight with panic and pure rage. "My credit cards are bouncing, all of them. I'm standing in the middle of a high-end boutique, and I look like an absolute fool. Did you forget to pay the credit card bill again?" Andre stared down at the foreclosure notice, his eyes finally reaching the signature line at the very bottom of the last page. The signature was not a faceless corporate stamp or a generic lawyer. It was a clear, steady handwriting signed in dark blue ink. The name on the foreclosure order, the sole owner of the holding company, was Jeremiah Vance. Nia, Andre whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the realization. "We do not have any money at all." "What are you talking about?" Nia demanded, her voice echoing sharply over the phone line. We have plenty of money. Call the bank right now and fix this embarrassing mess. The house is in foreclosure, Andre said, feeling a cold, sickly sweat break out on his forehead. The trust is gone, Nia. The money is gone. I'm looking at a legal notice and it says we owe $800,000 by next week. The line went dead silent. The grand illusion of their wealthy, perfect life had just evaporated into thin air, leaving them with nothing but massive debt. Nia hung up the phone, her hands shaking violently. She left the pile of expensive cashmere sweaters on the glass counter and walked out of the luxury boutique, ignoring the confused calls of the sales associate. She drove her leased SUV across town, her mind racing with pure denial. Andre was an idiot, she told herself. He had simply misread a banking error or fell for a terrible scam. She pulled into the parking lot of Jordan's elementary school, picked up her son, and drove directly to his private speech therapy clinic. They walked into the brightly lit, colorful lobby. Nia approached the front desk, offering her usual polished smile. Jordan is here for his 2:00 session, Nia said smoothly. The clinic administrator, a stern woman with thick glasses, stopped typing on her computer and looked up. I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance, the administrator said, her voice completely devoid of its usual warmth. But Jordan cannot attend his session today, or any future sessions until the account balance is settled in full. Nia felt a hot flash of pure embarrassment as two other wealthy mothers looked over from the waiting area. What are you talking about? Nia whispered fiercely, leaning over the counter. My father Vernon prepaid for the entire year. Check your system again right now. The administrator turned her monitor around, pointing a pen at the red numbers on the screen. Your father has never paid a single invoice at this clinic, the woman said, clearly ensuring the entire room could hear. This account has been fully funded by a private corporate trust for the past 2 years. That trust was officially frozen this morning and the autopay was revoked. You currently owe $8,000 in back pay, Mrs. Vance. We cannot see Jordan until a wire transfer clears. Nia grabbed Jordan by the hand, her face burning with a fiery, humiliating shame, and dragged him out of the clinic. She drove back to the mansion recklessly, her tires screeching as she pulled into the driveway. She burst through the front door, leaving Jordan in the living room with his tablet, and marched straight into the kitchen. Andre was still standing at the marble island, staring blankly at the scattered legal papers. Nia slammed her purse onto the counter. This is a sick joke, Nia screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. The clinic just turned us away like beggars. They said the trust is gone and my father never paid them. Andre slowly turned the foreclosure notice around, sliding it across the smooth marble so Nia could read the final page. Look at the signature, Nia, Andre said, his voice hollow and completely defeated. It is my father. Jeremiah owns the trust. Jeremiah owns this house. He has been paying for everything and we just kicked him out into the street. Nia stared at the dark blue ink, her eyes widening in absolute horror as the reality finally clicked into place. No, Nia gasped, shaking her head aggressively. No, your father wears cheap flannel shirts. He drives an old truck. He is just an old carpenter, Andre. This has to be a forgery or a massive mistake. It is not a mistake, Andre yelled, finally showing a spark of real anger. He played us, Nia. Or rather, we played ourselves. We treated him like dirt, and he just pulled the plug on our entire life. We have 7 days before the bank locks the doors and takes this house. Nia paced the length of the kitchen, her polished nails biting into her palms. Fine, Nia snapped, stopping abruptly. Fine. If your father wants to play games, let him. We do not need his hidden money. My father is upstairs in the guest room right now. He is a millionaire, Andre. He just dropped 50 grand on an Aspen trip without blinking. I will go upstairs, tell him what your petty father did, and Vernon will write us a check to cover the house. Andre looked at his wife, wanting desperately to believe her, but a cold, sinking feeling had already settled deep in his stomach. Go ask him then, Andre whispered. Miles away from the panicked suburban mansion, the atmosphere was vastly different. Jeremiah sat at the head of a massive, polished, mahogany table inside a towering glass boardroom overlooking the downtown Atlanta skyline. He was no longer wearing his faded flannel shirt or his scuffed work boots. He wore a bespoke charcoal gray three-piece suit tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders. A private investigator, a sharp man named Miller, walked into the quiet room and slid a thick black leather folder across the table. "You were right to have me look into him, Mr. Vance," the investigator said quietly, taking a seat opposite Jeremiah. Jeremiah opened the folder, his eyes scanning the detailed financial profiles and the disturbing surveillance photographs. "Tell me about Vernon," Jeremiah commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. The investigator leaned forward, tapping a glossy photograph of Vernon's luxury sports car. "Vernon is completely broke, sir," the investigator stated bluntly. "The cars are leased. The designer suits are bought on credit, and the Aspen trip was funded by a high-interest offshore loan. But that is the least of his problems. Vernon has a massive gambling addiction, and he has been borrowing heavy cash from a very dangerous syndicate in Chicago." Jeremiah flipped to the next page, looking at a ledger of massive debts. "How much does he owe them?" Jeremiah asked, his face an unreadable mask of stone. $500,000, the investigator replied grimly. "And they are not polite creditors, sir. They have been tracking him. They know he is staying at your son's house in Atlanta. They gave him until the end of the month to produce the cash, or they are going to collect their debt in blood. He is a cornered rat, Mr. Vance, and a cornered rat will bite whoever is closest." Jeremiah closed the black folder smoothly, resting his hands on top of the soft leather. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city traffic move far below him. Vernon was a desperate, dangerous man living inside a house that was about to be repossessed. The pressure was mounting, and Jeremiah knew exactly how a man like Vernon would react when the walls finally closed in. "Keep an eye on the house, Miller," Jeremiah ordered quietly. "The real show is about to begin." Vernon adjusted the collar of his silk robe, standing in the luxurious guest suite of the Atlanta mansion. He looked out the window, admiring his leased sports car in the driveway, feeling entirely pleased with his performance at dinner. His burner phone, hidden deep inside his leather travel bag, suddenly began to vibrate aggressively. Vernon felt a cold spike of pure dread pierce his stomach. He walked over to the bag, pulling out the cheap plastic phone, and answered it with a trembling hand. "We are tired of waiting, Vernon." A low, gravelly voice echoed through the tiny speaker. "You have $500,000 due by Friday, and we know exactly where you are sleeping. If the wire transfer does not hit our Chicago account, we are going to burn that nice suburban house down with everyone inside it." Vernon swallowed hard, his throat completely dry. "I have the money," Vernon lied, his voice pitching up in panic. "My daughter and her husband are wealthy. They are going to float me the cash by tomorrow morning. Just give me 24 hours, I swear on my life." The line clicked dead, leaving Vernon listening to the empty silence. He tossed the phone onto the plush bed, wiping a bead of cold sweat from his forehead. He had to act fast. He needed to secure a massive loan from Andre, using the Aspen trip as leverage to show he was good for the money. Vernon tied his silk robe tighter, plastered a confident smile on his face, and walked downstairs to the kitchen. He found Nia pacing the marble floor, completely hysterical, while Andre sat with his head buried in his hands. "What is all this shouting about?" Vernon asked smoothly, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "You two are ruining a perfectly good morning," Dad Nia cried out, running over to him, her eyes red and puffy. "Thank God you are awake. We have a massive emergency, and we need your help right now. Andre made a terrible financial mistake, and the bank is threatening to foreclose on the house." Vernon froze the coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "Foreclose." Vernon repeated, his confident smile slipping completely off his face. What do you mean foreclose? You two have a massive trust fund covering this place. The trust is gone. Dad, Nia sobbed, grabbing his arm desperately. It was frozen this morning. My credit cards are bouncing everywhere, and Jordan was just kicked out of his therapy clinic. We need $800,000 by next week, or we are on the street. Please, Dad, you have millions. You have to write us a check today. Vernon stared at his daughter, the walls of the kitchen suddenly spinning around him. He felt the blood drain entirely from his face. He did not have $800,000. He did not even have $800 to his name. The Chicago syndicate was going to kill him, and his only exit strategy had just evaporated into thin air. I need a drink, Vernon muttered, pulling his arm away from Nia and rushing out of the kitchen. He walked directly into Andre's home office, slamming the heavy door behind him. He poured a glass of scotch from the crystal decanter on the desk, his hands shaking so violently the glass rattled against the wood. He took a massive gulp, the cheap liquor burning his throat. He looked down at the mahogany desk, expecting to see unpaid utility bills. Instead, he saw the thick stack of legal papers, the notice of foreclosure, spread out under the desk lamp. Vernon set his glass down, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. He read the details of the blind corporate trust, the entity that had paid for the mortgage, the therapy, and the luxury lifestyle for the past 5 years. He flipped to the very last page, expecting to see a massive corporate conglomerate. Instead, he saw a single name signed in sharp, dark blue ink. Jeremiah Vance. Vernon stopped breathing. He picked up the paper, bringing it closer to his face, utterly incapable of believing his own eyes. Jeremiah, the quiet, pathetic old man in the flannel shirt, was the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar holding company. The grandfather he had just mocked and kicked out of the house was the silent billionaire keeping them all afloat. A dark, vicious idea began to form in Vernon's mind. He looked at the massive balance of the trust printed clearly on the second page. It was more than enough to pay off the Chicago syndicate, save the house, and keep him living in luxury for the rest of his miserable life. The money was right there, sitting in the hands of an old carpenter who clearly did not know what to do with it. Vernon grabbed the papers and walked back into the kitchen, his posture completely changed. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating predator. Nia Vernon said, his voice dropping to a serious, authoritative whisper. Look at this signature. Nia wiped her eyes, taking the papers from his hands. It is Jeremiah, she whispered, her voice full of confusion. He is the one who cut us off. Listen to me very carefully, Vernon commanded, gripping Nia by the shoulders. Your father-in-law is not acting out of malice, he is acting out of severe dementia. I have seen this happen to old men before, Nia. They hoard their wealth, they become paranoid, and they turn on their own family. Jeremiah is sitting on a fortune that rightfully belongs to Andre, and he is losing his mind. Andre looked up from the island, his eyes red. My father is not senile, Andre argued weakly. He's just punishing us for how we treated him last night. He cut off his own grandson's medical care, Andre Vernon yelled, pointing a finger directly at his face. Does a sane, loving grandfather do that to a boy? No, he does not. Jeremiah is a danger to himself, and he is destroying your family. If you do not step up and take control of his estate right now, the bank will take this house, and Jordan will suffer. Nia looked at her father, completely desperate for a lifeline, and swallowed the lie whole. What do we do, Dad? Nia asked, her voice hardening with newfound resolve. We protect the family, Vernon said, a sick, greedy smile forming on his lips. I know a very discreet lawyer here in Atlanta. We are going to get an emergency conservatorship, and we are going to take every single penny away from that crazy old man before he ruins us all. Andre shook his head, stepping back from the marble island. You cannot be serious, Vernon, Andre said, his voice trembling with disbelief. My father is not sick. He is just angry with us. We cannot just steal his estate because we missed a mortgage payment. Nia slammed her hand down on the counter, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the stone. "Wake up, Andre!" Nia yelled, her eyes wide with panic and pure desperation. "We are not missing a payment, we are losing our entire life." He cut off Jordan. Andre, he cut off his own blood. A sane man does not do that. He is hoarding millions of dollars while we are about to be thrown out into the street. Vernon did not wait for Andre to grow a spine. He walked back into the home office, pulling out his personal cell phone. He scrolled past his list of wealthy fake friends and dialed a number he kept for very specific, very dirty problems. The phone rang 3 times before a slick, raspy voice answered. "Richard speaking." The voice said, sounding bored but entirely awake. "Richard, it is Vernon," he said, pacing across the hardwood floor of the office. "I have a highly lucrative, highly urgent situation, and I need emergency documents drafted by tonight. I'm talking about a full conservatorship and an absolute power of attorney." The lawyer chuckled dryly over the line. "Those are heavy legal weapons," Vernon Richard said smoothly. "You cannot just wave a wand and take over someone's life. Who is the target and what is the net worth?" Vernon looked through the glass door of the office, watching his daughter scream at her husband in the kitchen. "The target is an old paranoid carpenter named Jeremiah Vance," Vernon whispered fiercely. "And the net worth is somewhere in the hundreds of millions. He has a massive blind trust, and he just dissolved it to punish my daughter. He's losing his mind. Richard, he is senile, and he is a danger to his own family. If he has that kind of money, he probably has his own legal team." Richard warned, his tone turning serious. "You bring a fake conservatorship to a judge and his lawyers will bury you under the jail." Vernon gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles turning stark white. He does not have a legal team on standby. Vernon lied, his mind racing with the immense pressure of the Chicago mob. He is an old man living in a run-down house on the edge of town pretending to be poor. He does not even use email, Richard. I need the papers, and I need them bulletproof. I need full control of his medical decisions, his banking, and that corporate trust. Richard sighed heavily, the sound of a leather chair squeaking over the speaker. "Fine." Richard agreed, the greed highly evident in his voice. "But the court will not just hand over the keys to the castle simply because you ask nicely. You need 3 things, Vernon, and you need them immediately. First, I need a signed power of attorney directly from Jeremiah. Second, I need a physician to sign off on his cognitive decline. And third, I need photographic proof that his living environment is hazardous and that he is entirely incapable of caring for himself." Vernon smelled a cold, dark expression settling over his face. "I will get you the signature today," Vernon promised, his voice dripping with sinister confidence. "And I will provide the photographic evidence of his miserable, dangerous living conditions. Just have the paperwork ready to file the minute I send you the signature. I will pay you double your usual rate, but this has to be executed by Monday morning. Do you understand me?" "Loud and clear," Vernon Richard said, ending the call with a sharp click. Vernon walked out of the office, his posture completely transformed. He was no longer a terrified debtor running from the mob. He was a predator closing in on his prey. He walked back into the kitchen where Andre was sitting on a bar stool, looking completely defeated. Nia was pacing rapidly, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "The papers are being drafted right now," Vernon announced, standing tall in the center of the room. "But we have to move quickly and we have to be extremely smart. The lawyer needs proof that Jeremiah is living in squalor and that he's losing his mind." Nia stopped pacing, looking at her father with a mix of genuine fear and dark determination. "How do we prove that, Dad?" Nia asked, her voice dropping to a low whisper. "He lives in a small house, but it is not dirty. He is perfectly healthy." "Then we make it dirty," Nia Vernon stated bluntly, his eyes locking coldly onto hers. "We create the exact reality that the judge needs to see." Andre told me yesterday that Jeremiah spends every Thursday afternoon volunteering at the community center down the street. That means his house is completely empty right now. We are going to drive over there. We are going to stage the environment, and we are going to take the photos ourselves. Andre looked up and his face pale with pure horror. You want to break into my father's house? Andre asked, his voice shaking violently. You want to frame him for dementia. That is a crime, Vernon. That is a serious felony. We cannot do this to him. He is my father. Vernon walked over to Andre, leaning down until they were face to face. Your father cut your throat, Andre Vernon whispered maliciously. He left your son without medical care, and he put a ticking clock on your home. If you do not do this, you will lose your wife, your house, and your dignity. So you sit here and you feel sorry for yourself. Nia and I are going to go save this family. Vernon grabbed the keys to Nia's luxury SUV and walked out the front door, leaving Andre sitting alone in the cold kitchen. Nia followed closely behind her father, her heart pounding furiously against her ribs, but her mind firmly set on the $800,000 debt. They climbed into the plush leather seats of the vehicle, and Vernon sped out of the pristine suburban neighborhood, driving toward the older working-class district of Atlanta. The drive took less than 20 minutes, but to Nia it felt like an eternity. She stared out the tinted window, watching the large brick mansions fade away, replaced by small, single-story homes with chain-link fences and overgrown lawns. Vernon pulled the heavy SUV up to the curb, parking directly in front of Jeremiah's modest, pale yellow house. The paint was peeling slightly around the window frames, and the front porch sagged under the weight of an old wooden swing. It was the perfect picture of an old, forgotten man, entirely detached from the massive wealth he secretly controlled. Vernon stepped out of the vehicle, carrying a large, dark canvas duffel bag over his shoulder. He walked briskly up the concrete walkway, his expensive leather shoes crunching softly against the fallen autumn leaves. Nia followed him up the porch steps, her hands trembling slightly as she looked around the quiet street to make sure none of the neighbors were watching them. He keeps a spare key under the ceramic flower pot. Nia whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. Andre told me once when we had to drop off some tools. Vernon nudged the heavy clay pot with the toe of his shoe, revealing a tarnished brass key hidden in the dirt. He picked it up, dusted it off carelessly, and slid it into the deadbolt. The lock clicked loudly, and Vernon pushed the front door open, stepping into the quiet, dimly lit hallway. The inside of Jeremiah's house was immaculately clean, smelling faintly of lemon polish and aged cedar wood. The living room was sparse, furnished with a well-worn fabric sofa, a small television set, and a large oak bookshelf filled with thick historical biographies. There was absolutely no sign of dementia, no sign of Kay, and certainly no sign of a man losing his grip on reality. It was simply the quiet home of an organized, disciplined mind. This will not work, Dad, Nia said nervously, stepping into the living room and looking around. The place is completely spotless. A judge will take one look at this and throw the entire case out of court. That is exactly why I brought the bag. Vernon replied coldly, dropping the canvas duffel onto the clean rug. We are going to paint a very different picture, Nia. We are going to show the court exactly what they expect to see when a man loses his mind. Vernon unzipped the bag, pulling out a handful of empty orange prescription bottles. He had stripped the labels off completely, making them look like a dangerous, unmanaged medical situation. He walked into the small bathroom and tipped the bottles over, scattering the plastic containers across the tiled floor and into the porcelain sink. He grabbed a clean towel, crumpled it up into a ball, and threw it into the corner, kicking over a small trash can to add to the mess. Go to the kitchen, Vernon ordered, pointing down the hall. Make it look like he forgot how to cook. Make it look dangerous, Nia. Think about your house. Think about your credit cards and get it done. Nia swallowed hard, pushing her guilt down deep, replacing it with the burning anger of her humiliation at the boutique. She walked into the spotless kitchen, opening the old refrigerator. She pulled out a carton of milk, unscrewed the cap, and poured a generous amount onto the clean linoleum floor, letting it pool around the base of the cabinets. She left the refrigerator door wide open, the internal light bulb glowing dimly in the midday shadows. Next, she took an old cast-iron skillet from the drying rack, placed it on the gas stove, and turned the burner on high. She tossed a dry dish towel perilously close to the open blue flame, stepping back as the fabric began to smoke slightly, leaving a charred black mark on the edge. Vernon walked into the living room, pulling a thick black marker and a stack of yellow sticky notes from his pocket. He began writing frantic, nonsensical phrases on the paper, his handwriting intentionally jagged and sloppy. "Do not trust the bank," he wrote on one note, slapping it onto the center of the television screen. "Where is my wife?" he scribbled on another, sticking it to the front door. "They are stealing my tools," he wrote, placing it on the coffee table beside a scattered pile of unopened junk mail, which he had purposely torn open and thrown across the floor. Vernon pulled out his phone, activating the bright camera flash. He walked through the house, snapping rapid photographs of the chaotic scenes they had just manufactured. He photographed the spilled pills in the bathroom, the chaotic, dangerous stove in the kitchen, and the paranoid notes covering the living room walls. The flash illuminated the dark corners of the house, capturing the perfect fabricated illusion of a tragic cognitive decline. What Vernon and Nia did not notice, however, was the tiny dark glass lens perfectly camouflaged inside the spine of a hollowed-out encyclopedia resting on the top shelf of the oak bookcase. They did not see the faint, almost microscopic red light blinking silently in the corner of the room. The motion-activated security camera installed by the highest-tier private security firm in Atlanta was silently recording every single movement. It captured Nia pouring the milk. It captured Vernon writing the fake notes. It captured the entire vicious felony in stunning high-definition video, beaming it directly to a secure server downtown. "We have enough," Vernon said, reviewing the terrible photographs on his glowing screen. "The lawyer will eat this up. Let us get out of here before the old man comes back from his little charity work." Nia quickly turned off the stove, leaving the scorched towel as evidence, and followed her father out the front door. Vernon locked the deadbolt, tossing the brass key back under the dirty flower pot. They got back into the luxury SUV, their hearts racing with the thrill of their dark crime. They drove away from the pale yellow house, entirely convinced they had just secured their wealthy future, completely unaware that they had just handed Jeremiah Vance the exact weapon he needed to destroy them. The late afternoon sun cast long, dark shadows across the pale yellow porch. Jeremiah sat quietly on the old wooden swing. He was holding a small carving knife and a fresh block of sweet-smelling cedar wood. His phone, resting silently inside his flannel breast pocket, had vibrated over 2 hours ago. It was a highly secure alert sent directly from his downtown security team. The alert confirmed that the high-definition footage of the break-in was safely stored on a heavily encrypted server. He knew exactly what Vernon and Nia had done in his kitchen. He knew about the fake notes, the spilled milk, and the incredibly dangerous fire hazard they had staged on his stove, and he knew without a shadow of a doubt that they were coming back to spring their trap. A heavy silver luxury SUV turned the corner, its massive tires rolling slowly down the quiet working-class street. The large vehicle parked along the curb directly in front of his modest house. Jeremiah did not stop whittling the cedar wood. He kept his head down, breathing evenly, letting his strong facial muscles relax into an expression of deep, confused exhaustion. The heavy car doors opened and slammed shut, echoing loudly in the quiet neighborhood. Heavy footsteps marched up the concrete walkway. Nia and Vernon walked up the wooden porch steps, their faces completely transformed. The pure, vicious greed from earlier in the day was entirely gone. In its place was a sickening, highly theatrical mask of deep concern, and profound pity. Jeremiah Nia said softly, her voice trembling with perfectly faked emotion. She stepped forward quickly and knelt down beside the wooden swing. She placed a warm, perfectly manicured hand over his rough, calloused knuckles. "We are so incredibly glad we caught you at home," she lied, her eyes shining with forced crocodile tears. "We have been so terribly worried about you all day long." Jeremiah looked up slowly, letting his eyes dart around the porch, as if he was struggling to recognize her for a brief, terrifying second. He dropped the carving knife onto his lap and let his hands tremble just a fraction of an inch. "Nia," he whispered, forcing his usually strong voice to sound thin and incredibly frail. "What are you doing here, and where is Andre?" "Andre is resting at home," Vernon chimed in, stepping onto the porch with a heavy, highly dramatic sigh. "He is just sick with worry over you, my old friend. We all are. Andre told us you have been forgetting things lately, leaving the stove on and misplacing your important medication. We just wanted to come by and check on your living situation ourselves." It was a brilliant, absolutely disgusting lie. They were using the exact evidence they had just manufactured to gaslight him on his own front porch. Jeremiah looked at Vernon, staring directly into the eyes of a man who owed $500,000 to a violent mob and saw nothing but a desperate, empty shell of a human being. "I do not know what you mean," Jeremiah mumbled, rubbing his forehead with a shaky, uncertain hand. "I just get a little tired sometimes, that is all. The house is big, and the paperwork is so incredibly confusing lately. I tried to pay the bills this morning, but the numbers keep moving around on the page, and I cannot focus." Nia squeezed his hand tighter, a predatory gleam flashing brightly behind her fake tears. "Oh, Jeremiah, you do not have to live like this." Nia cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "You have been carrying this massive burden all by yourself for so many long years. The mortgage, the complex trusts, the endless bank accounts. It is simply too much stress for a man your age, especially when your memory is starting to slip away." Vernon pulled a thick, pristine manila envelope from inside his tailored suit jacket. He held it with both hands, presenting it like a wholly life-saving artifact. "We went to see a very nice family lawyer this morning," Vernon said, his tone incredibly soft and dangerously persuasive. "We explained how overwhelmed you are and how much you just want to relax and enjoy your wonderful grandson. The lawyer drafted some very simple documents, Jeremiah. Just a little bit of standard paperwork to let Nia and Andre handle the stressful bank calls and the confusing mortgage payments for you, so you can finally rest," Nia added gently, stroking his weathered hand. "If you just sign these simple papers, we will take care of the house and the corporate trust. We can even bring you to the Aspen trip for Christmas, Jeremiah. You will not have to worry about a single financial decision ever again. We just want to help our family heal." Jeremiah looked down at the thick envelope, feeling the absolute sickness of their ultimate betrayal. They were offering him a cheap ticket to a ski vacation in exchange for the absolute surrender of his entire empire and his personal freedom. They wanted to declare him legally incompetent, lock him away in a terrible medical facility, and drain his massive accounts, all to pay off a violent gambling debt. Jeremiah stared at the thick manila envelope, letting his jaw drop open just a fraction of an inch. He let out a long, rattling breath, forcing his lungs to sound weak and entirely defeated. He looked at Nia, and then he looked at Vernon, projecting a perfect image of a broken, confused old man. "I just want the family to be together," Jeremiah whispered, his voice cracking perfectly on the last word. "I do not want to fight about money anymore. The bank called me this morning, and the man on the phone was talking so fast I could not understand a single thing he said. My chest hurts, Nia, and I just want to rest." Nia smiled a bright, predatory smile that did not reach her cold eyes. "I know you do, Jeremiah," she said softly, rubbing his shoulder with fake affection. "That is exactly why we are doing this. We are going to lift all of this heavy burden right off your shoulders." Vernon moved quickly like a snake striking its prey. He pulled a thick stack of crisp white papers from the envelope and spread them out across the small wooden table on the porch. The documents were dense, filled with complex, absolute legal terms. Jeremiah recognized the brutal language immediately because he had spent 40 years reading contracts and destroying corporate rivals. The papers were a full, irrevocable transfer of power. They granted Vernon and Nia complete control over his medical care, his real estate, and the massive corporate trust holding his life's work. It was a complete hostile takeover disguised as family charity. "I just need you to sign right here at the bottom of these 3 pages," Vernon instructed, pointing a thick finger at the blank yellow lines. "It is just a simple medical proxy and a standard banking authorization so Nia can talk to the mortgage company tomorrow morning." Jeremiah reached up, patting the empty breast pockets of his faded flannel shirt, his hands trembling violently. "I do not have my reading glasses," Jeremiah muttered, squinting his eyes and leaning closer to the blinding white paper. "The letters are all blurry, Vernon. I cannot read the fine print without my spectacles. Maybe I should go inside and look for them in the kitchen before I sign anything important." Nia placed her hand firmly over the document, stopping him from standing up. "Oh, Jeremiah, you do not need to strain your eyes," she cooed, her voice tight with sudden hidden panic. "You know we would never bring you anything dangerous. It is exactly what my father just said, just standard family paperwork. The lawyer is waiting for us to file this before the courthouse closes so we can save Andre from losing the house. You trust us, do you not?" Jeremiah looked into her eyes, seeing the absolute terrifying greed burning just beneath the surface. He saw a woman willing to sell her own soul and destroy her husband's father simply to keep her luxury boutique shopping sprees and her expensive sports cars. He saw a man standing next to her, ready to trade an innocent life to a violent Chicago syndicate. "I trust my family." Jeremiah lied quietly, his voice a flawless, pathetic whisper. Vernon reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a heavy silver fountain pen. He uncapped it smoothly and pressed the cold metal into Jeremiah's shaking hand. "Just press down firmly, my friend Vernon," said his voice dripping with sinister anticipation. 3 simple signatures and all your troubles will completely disappear." Jeremiah gripped the heavy silver pen, forcing his knuckles to turn white. He let his hand shake, dragging the nib across the crisp paper, creating a slightly sloppy but entirely legible signature. He signed the absolute power of attorney. He signed the full medical conservatorship. He signed away his fictional freedom, knowing with absolute certainty that the paper he was signing was entirely worthless. The corporate trust was legally structured as an irrevocable fortress entirely immune to this exact type of cheap, desperate fraud. And even if it was not, he had the high-definition security footage proving they had broken into his home, manufactured fake medical evidence, and coerced a man they claimed was severely mentally compromised. He finished the 3rd signature and let the silver pen drop from his hand, letting it clatter loudly against the wooden table. There Jeremiah breathed heavily, slumping back into the wooden porch swing. "Is that everything you need to save the house, Nia?" Nia snatched the papers off the table, moving with terrifying speed. She clutched the signed documents to her chest, as if she had just stolen the crown jewels. "Yes, Jeremiah," she said, her fake tears drying up instantly. "That is absolutely everything we need. You just rest now, we will handle the rest of the messy details." Vernon slid the silver pen back into his pocket, completely unable to hide the massive, arrogant grin spreading across his face. He looked at Jeremiah not with pity, but with the utter disgusting contempt of a man who believed he had just outsmarted a billionaire. "We will call you tomorrow, old man," Vernon said smoothly, dropping the act entirely. "Do not forget to turn the stove off tonight." They turned their backs on him, walking down the concrete path, carrying their forged golden ticket. Jeremiah sat perfectly still on the wooden swing, his tremors vanishing completely the exact second they looked away. He watched them celebrate, and he waited for the trap to snap shut. Nia practically sprinted down the cracked concrete walkway, her expensive heels clicking loudly against the pavement. She reached the heavy silver SUV and pulled the door open, throwing her designer purse onto the passenger seat. Vernon slid into the plush leather interior and slammed the heavy door shut, sealing them inside the quiet, climate-controlled cabin. The moment the doors locked, the entire performance evaporated, leaving nothing but pure, unfiltered elation. Nia looked down at the thick manila envelope resting securely on her lap. She let out a loud, breathless laugh, her hands shaking with pure adrenaline. "We actually did it, Dad," she squealed, tapping her manicured nails against the crisp paper. "He signed every single page without even reading the fine print. I cannot believe how easy that was. He is an absolute fool." Vernon leaned back into the soft leather headrest, letting out a long, heavy sigh of immense relief. "He is a weak old man, Nia," Vernon said, a cruel, mocking smile spreading across his face. "He spent his entire life building a fortune just to hand the keys over to us because he was too afraid to put on his glasses. You played your part perfectly, my dear. Your husband would have crumbled, he would have started crying and ruined the entire plan. But you have a spine of absolute steel." Nia started the engine, the powerful motor roaring to life, filling the cabin with a deep, satisfying hum. "I'm not going to let some senile carpenter take my home," Nia stated coldly, gripping the leather steering wheel. "We are going to take this directly to Richard tomorrow morning. We will have the court stamp it, and I'm going straight to the bank. I'm going to unfreeze my credit cards, pay off this ridiculous mortgage, and we are going to Aspen like absolute royalty." Vernon nodded, his mind already calculating his own desperate escape route. "Drive us back to the house," Vernon instructed, pulling his dark canvas duffel bag onto his lap. "I need to make a very important phone call to finalize some offshore investments." Nia shifted the massive vehicle into gear, pulling away from the curb, leaving the pale yellow house completely behind them. She did not look back in the rearview mirror, completely consumed by her own toxic greed. As the SUV sped down the highway, Vernon reached deep inside the canvas bag and pulled out the cheap plastic burner phone. He powered the device on, watching the small screen glow brightly in the dim cabin. He dialed the Chicago area code, his thumb pressing the small buttons with frantic, eager energy. He held the plastic phone to his ear, listening to the hollow, ringing sound, his heart pounding a triumphant rhythm against his ribs. The line clicked open and the same low, gravelly voice answered. The dangerous voice commanded flatly. "It is Vernon," he said, his voice dripping with newfound arrogant confidence. "I'm calling to give you an update on our little financial arrangement. You do not need to send anyone to Atlanta, and you certainly do not need to make any more threats." The voice on the other end remained completely silent, waiting for the money, not the excuses. "I just secured a massive, irrevocable power of attorney." Vernon bragged his chest, puffing out proudly. "I have complete legal control over a corporate trust worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The paperwork is signed and it is being filed with a high-level judge first thing tomorrow morning. The assets are completely liquid and they are sitting right in the palm of my hand. You have until Friday noon," Vernon, the gravelly voice, warned, completely unimpressed by the grand speech. "If $500,000 is not sitting in our routing account, we will stop calling your phone and we will start visiting your family. You will have your money on Friday morning." Vernon promised, a wicked grin stretching across his face. "I will wire the funds directly from the primary trust account the second the bank opens its doors. We are fully square, my friend. Do not lose a single second of sleep over it." Vernon ended the call, snapping the cheap phone shut and tossing it carelessly back into the bag. He looked out the passenger window, watching the city lights blur past them, feeling like the smartest man in the entire world. He had walked right up to the edge of total destruction, stared death right in the face, and walked away with a billionaire's fortune. "Who was that, Dad?" Nia asked, casually keeping her eyes firmly on the road ahead. Just a private wealth broker, Vernon lied smoothly, patting his suit jacket. I am making sure the Aspen Chalet is fully staffed and ready for our arrival. We are going to have a very Merry Christmas, Nia. Nia smiled broadly, a genuine relaxed smile that she had not worn all day. You know, Dad. Nia mused, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel. Once we have control of the accounts, I think I'm going to fire Jordan's speech therapist. $8,000 is absolutely ridiculous for a few hours of talking. We can just send him to the free public clinic and use that money for a new kitchen remodel. The marble is starting to look a bit dated. Vernon laughed loudly, a booming, arrogant sound that filled the expensive car. That is the spirit, Nia, he agreed wholeheartedly. It is our money now, and we decide exactly how it gets spent. They pulled into their pristine suburban neighborhood, completely blind to the reality of their situation. They parked in the wide driveway, stepping out of the vehicle like conquering heroes, entirely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already completely vanished. The heavy silver SUV disappeared around the corner, and the quiet suburban street was completely empty again. Jeremiah sat on the wooden porch swing, and he immediately stopped acting. The violent tremors in his hands vanished instantly, replaced by absolute rock-solid stillness. He did not look like a confused, terrified old man anymore. He sat up completely straight, his broad shoulders squared and his dark eyes burned with a cold, terrifying clarity. The trap was perfectly set, and the mice had just sprinted happily into the steel cage, carrying the cheese in their own greedy hands. Jeremiah stood up from the swing, his heavy work boots making a deliberate, rhythmic sound on the wooden floorboards. He walked over to the front door, turned the brass knob, and stepped back into his quiet hallway. He walked into the living room, looking calmly at the ridiculous manufactured chaos they had left behind. He saw the brightly colored sticky notes plastered across his television screen, covered in frantic handwriting. He walked into the kitchen, looking at the puddle of spilled milk on the linoleum and the scorched, blackened dish towel resting dangerously close to the stove. It was a vicious, calculated crime scene, specifically designed to steal his freedom and lock him away in a sterile white medical room for the rest of his natural life. He reached into his flannel shirt pocket and pulled out his sleek, highly secure smartphone. He tapped the glowing glass screen, opening the encrypted security application that monitored his entire property. The high-definition video feed buffered for a fraction of a second before displaying a crystal-clear time-stamped recording of the last hour. He watched the tiny screen, seeing Vernon scatter the empty pill bottles across the bathroom floor. He watched Nia intentionally pour the milk and turn on the gas stove, creating a lethal fire hazard in his home. The audio was pristine, capturing every single cruel, greedy word they had spoken, while they believed they were completely alone. Jeremiah closed the video application and dialed a highly restricted phone number. The phone rang exactly one time before a sharp, incredibly alert voice answered the secure line. Yes, Mr. Vance, the lead corporate litigator said smoothly, fully prepared for his orders. They took the bait. Jeremiah stated plainly, his voice ringing with absolute unyielding authority. Vernon and Nia just left my property. They are carrying a signed medical proxy and a full power of attorney granting them complete control over my entire estate. The lawyer chuckled softly over the line, a dark, knowing sound. They actually made you sign it? The lawyer asked, sounding almost impressed by their sheer reckless audacity. They do realize the primary trust is completely irrevocable, do they not? A cheap piece of paper signed on a porch cannot override a financial fortress built by a dozen federal tax attorneys. They do not know anything, Jeremiah said coldly, walking back into the living room. They are entirely blinded by panic and their own toxic entitlement. Vernon owes $500,000 to a Chicago gambling syndicate, and he thinks he just found his golden parachute. But more importantly, we have the high-definition footage of the entire felony. They broke into my home today. They manufactured false medical evidence to simulate severe cognitive decline. And they used that fabricated evidence to maliciously coerce a signature from a man they believed was mentally compromised. That is textbook elder abuse, the lawyer noted quickly, his tone turning incredibly sharp and highly predatory. Coupled with the massive financial aspect, we are looking at federal wire fraud and a heavy criminal conspiracy charge. I will contact the federal authorities immediately, and we can have them arrested at their house tonight. No. Jeremiah commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. Do not arrest them tonight. Let them sleep in their expensive beds, believing they have won the entire war. Let them take those forged documents to the courthouse tomorrow morning and let them file the paperwork with a judge. The lawyer paused for a moment, processing the brilliant, devastating strategy. You want them to fully commit the fraud on the public record, the lawyer clarified, the deep respect highly evident in his voice. You want them to walk right into the bank and try to execute the hostile takeover. Exactly. Jeremiah confirmed, staring at a framed photograph of his late wife resting on the oak bookshelf. Tell the wealth management firm to expect them tomorrow afternoon. Let them sit in the glass boardroom and let them demand the keys to the castle. I want them to feel absolute supreme victory right before we take absolutely everything away from them. I will assemble the entire litigation team and notify the federal agents to be on standby at the firm, the lawyer promised efficiently. We will be waiting for them in the boardroom, Mr. Vance. Jeremiah ended the call, slipping the secure phone back into his pocket. He looked around his quiet, pale yellow house, feeling a deep, heavy sorrow wash over him. He had spent his entire life building an empire, hoping to create a legacy of safety and generational wealth for his son. But wealth without discipline was nothing but a slow-acting poison. He had spoiled Andre, protecting him from every single hardship, and in return, his son had allowed violent vultures to circle his home. He walked into the kitchen, picked up a wet mop, and slowly began to clean up the spilled milk on the floor. He wiped down the cabinets, threw the scorched towel into the trash, and meticulously removed every single fake note from his living room walls. He put his house back in perfect, disciplined order, just like he was about to do with his entire family. Tomorrow afternoon, the quiet carpenter would disappear completely, and the ruthless, silent billionaire would finally take his seat at the head of the table. The mid-morning sun reflected blindingly off the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Atlanta. Vernon parked his leased luxury sports car in the premier valet spot right in front of the prestigious wealth management firm. He stepped out onto the pristine pavement, smoothing the lapels of his tailored suit, feeling exactly like a conquering king. Nia emerged from the passenger side, clutching her designer leather purse, her chin tilted upward with supreme arrogant confidence. Andre stepped out of the back seat, his shoulders slumped and his eyes darting nervously around the busy street. "This is it," Andre, Nia said sharply, adjusting her expensive diamond necklace. "Stand up straight and act like you belong here. We are about to take control of our entire future, so please try to look the part." Andre swallowed hard, nodding slowly, but the terrible knot of guilt in his stomach only twisted tighter. He followed his wife and his father-in-law through the massive, revolving glass doors. The lobby of the financial firm was a masterclass in quiet, intimidating wealth. The floors were cut from seamless Italian marble, and the air smelled faintly of expensive espresso and polished leather. Vernon marched directly up to the main reception desk, slapping the thick manila envelope right onto the smooth granite counter. "Good morning, Vernon," announced loudly, projecting his voice so the passing corporate executives would hear him. "My name is Vernon, and I am here with my daughter and her husband, Andre Vance. We are here to officially assume control of the Jeremiah Vance Corporate Trust. We have an urgent court-mandated appointment with your lead account administrator." The receptionist, a sharp young man in a dark suit, did not flinch at the loud, abrasive tone. He looked down at the thick envelope and then typed a few quick keystrokes on his sleek computer terminal. "Of course, sir," the receptionist replied smoothly, his voice completely void of any emotion. "The legal team has been expecting you all morning. Please take the private elevator directly to the penthouse boardroom. They are waiting for you on the top floor." Vernon smiled a greedy, highly predatory smirk. "See, Nia," Vernon whispered, tapping the granite counter with his knuckles. "Total compliance. When you have the official court orders, these suits fold like cheap lawn chairs." They walked across the vast marble lobby and stepped into the private, polished steel elevator. The doors glided shut, and the high-speed car rocketed upward, carrying them to the very top of the financial empire. Nia watched the digital floor numbers climb higher and higher, her heart racing with absolute thrill. She pictured the massive bank balances, the cleared credit cards, and the endless luxury shopping sprees that were just moments away. The elevator chimed softly, and the doors opened, revealing a breathtaking penthouse suite. The entire floor was encased in floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a stunning panoramic view of the sprawling Atlanta skyline. A silent assistant led them down a wide, richly carpeted hallway and opened the heavy double doors to the main executive boardroom. The room was massive and utterly intimidating. A long, polished mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by 20 plush leather chairs. The walls were lined with abstract modern art, and the air was perfectly heavily still. "Take a seat anywhere," the assistant instructed, politely gesturing to the empty mahogany table. "The legal team will be right with you." The assistant closed the heavy wooden doors, leaving the three of them alone in the silent boardroom. Vernon did not hesitate for a single second. He walked straight to the head of the massive table, pulling out the largest, most commanding leather chair, and sat down like a newly crowned emperor. He placed the manila envelope right in the center of the polished wood, patting it affectionately. Nia took the seat immediately to his right, crossing her legs and placing her designer purse on the table. She looked out the massive glass windows, surveying the tiny, distant cars moving far below them. "We own all of this." Nia breathed softly, a look of pure, intoxicating power washing over her face. "Your father hid this massive empire from us for our entire marriage, but now it is finally ours." Andre slowly pulled out a chair near the middle of the table, sitting down heavily. He looked at the thick envelope containing the forged medical documents and the coerced signatures. He knew exactly what they had done to his father, and the crushing weight of that terrible betrayal made it incredibly difficult to breathe. "Just relax," Vernon ordered, leaning back in the plush leather chair and steepling his fingers together. "We won the war. The judge signed the emergency conservatorship this morning without asking a single question. The court order is absolute, and the bank has zero choice but to hand over the master accounts. In 5 minutes, I'm going to wire a massive payment to Chicago, and your precious little house will be completely saved." Vernon looked at his expensive gold watch, tapping his fingers impatiently against the armrest. He was completely ready to dictate his strict terms to a room full of terrified corporate bankers. He was entirely ready to walk out of the glass tower as one of the richest men in the city. He did not know that the heavy wooden doors of the boardroom were about to open and absolute ruin was about to walk inside. The heavy wooden doors of the penthouse boardroom swung open with a smooth, silent grace. Vernon sat up completely straight, puffing out his chest, fully expecting a terrified junior banker to walk through the frame. Instead, the air in the room seemed to freeze entirely. 3 incredibly sharp, intimidating men in pristine dark navy suits walked into the room. They carried thick leather briefcases, and they moved with the synchronized, predatory confidence of elite corporate litigators. Nia smiled slightly, thinking these were the lawyers coming to hand over the accounts. But then a 4th man stepped through the heavy doors, and the arrogant smile vanished from her face instantly. Jeremiah walked into the massive glass boardroom, and he looked nothing like the frail, confused carpenter they had left on the porch. He was not wearing his faded flannel shirt. and he was not wearing his scuffed work boots. Jeremiah wore a bespoke charcoal gray three-piece suit cut precisely to his broad, imposing shoulders. A crisp white silk pocket square rested in his breast pocket, and a heavy platinum watch gleamed quietly on his steady, unwavering wrist. He stood perfectly tall, exuding an aura of absolute crushing authority that immediately sucked all the oxygen out of the massive room. Andre gasped out loud, pushing his chair back across the carpet, completely unable to process the terrifying transformation. "What is this?" Vernon demanded loudly, his voice cracking slightly as a cold spike of panic hit his chest. "What are you doing here, old man? You were supposed to be resting at home." Jeremiah did not answer him right away. He walked slowly and deliberately down the length of the long mahogany table. His dark eyes locked directly onto Vernon, and his gaze was entirely devoid of any warmth or any mercy. He reached the head of the table, standing directly over the leather chair that Vernon had so arrogantly claimed. "You are sitting in my chair, Vernon," Jeremiah said quietly, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that commanded absolute immediate obedience. "Get up." Vernon felt a sudden icy sweat break out on the back of his neck. He looked at the three terrifying lawyers standing perfectly still behind Jeremiah. He looked down at the manila envelope resting on the table, trying desperately to hold on to his illusion of power. "I have a legally binding court order, Jeremiah," Vernon stammered, his hands beginning to shake just a fraction of an inch. "I am your legal conservator, and you have absolutely no right to be in this building. I'm calling security right now to have you escorted back to your house." Jeremiah did not raise his voice, and he did not break eye contact. "I will not ask you a second time, Vernon." Jeremiah stated, his tone dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. "Get out of my chair." The sheer, overwhelming force of his presence was too much for the desperate gambler to withstand. Vernon swallowed hard and slowly stood up, sliding out of the large leather chair, looking incredibly small and entirely foolish. Jeremiah sat down smoothly at the head of the table, adjusting his expensive silk tie and resting his large, powerful hands on the polished wood. Nia stared at her father-in-law, her mind racing in absolute terrifying circles. "Jeremiah," she whispered softly, trying to muster her fake sweet tone from yesterday. "We are just trying to help you. You are sick and you are entirely confused. You signed the papers for us, do you not remember?" The lead litigator, a tall man with silver hair, stepped forward and opened his thick leather briefcase. He pulled out a crisp, pristine stack of heavily watermarked documents and placed them gently onto the mahogany table. "My client is not confused, Nia," the lawyer said, his voice echoing with absolute clinical precision. "My name is David, and I am the lead counsel for the Vance Corporate Trust, and you are currently sitting in the middle of a massive federal crime scene." Andre buried his face in his hands, letting out a long, quiet sob. He knew it was over. He knew his father had caught them, and there was absolutely no escape from the terrifying wrath of a patient man. Vernon pointed a trembling finger at the lawyer. "I have a signature," Vernon yelled, his panic finally bubbling over into a pathetic, desperate rage. "He signed the power of attorney yesterday afternoon. The judge stamped it this morning, and it is a legally binding document. You cannot stop me from accessing those accounts." David smiled, a cold, entirely humorless expression. He looked at Vernon with the absolute disdain of a predator staring at a trapped, foolish rat. "You brought a piece of paper to a fortress, Vernon," David said smoothly, his voice echoing off the cold glass walls. "That emergency medical proxy is entirely worthless. The corporate trust holding Mr. Vance's assets is legally structured as a blind, irrevocable entity. It cannot be altered. It cannot be dissolved, and it certainly cannot be handed over to a desperate gambler simply because he tricked a man on a wooden porch." Vernon turned completely pale, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "I am not a gambler," Vernon lied, weakly, looking desperately at Nia for support. He is legally incompetent, and I am his court-appointed guardian. The judge who signed your fraudulent order this morning has already been contacted by our firm. David continued his tone absolutely ruthless. The order was officially vacated exactly 10 minutes ago, pending a massive criminal investigation for elder abuse and federal wire fraud. You do not own this trust, Vernon. You do not own the Aspen Chalet. You do not even own the tailored suit you are wearing today. David reached into his thick leather briefcase and pulled out the heavy black folder provided by the private investigator. He tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table right next to the forged manila envelope. The folder slid smoothly across the polished wood, stopping directly in front of Andre. "Go ahead and open it, Andre," Jeremiah instructed, quietly looking at his broken son with a mixture of deep pity and absolute resolve. Andre reached out with shaking hands and flipped the black cover open. He saw the detailed financial ledgers, the offshore bank loans, and the massive high-interest gambling debts. He saw surveillance photographs of dangerous men standing outside his own suburban home. He owes $500,000 to a violent Chicago syndicate. Jeremiah stated, his voice a heavy, immovable weight in the silent room. They gave him until Friday afternoon to pay them back, or they were going to burn your beautiful house to the ground with you and your son inside it. He did not come here to save your family, Andre. He came here to steal my entire empire so the mob would not break his legs. Nia jumped up from her plush leather chair, her perfectly manicured hands trembling with pure, desperate rage. "That is a disgusting lie," Nia screamed, pointing a sharp, accusatory finger at Jeremiah. "You are just a paranoid old man making up crazy stories because you are losing your mind. We have proof that you are entirely senile. We took pictures of your filthy, dangerous house. You left the gas stove on Jeremiah. You could have killed someone." Jeremiah did not blink, and he did not raise his voice. He simply reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a small, sleek silver remote. He pressed a single button, and the heavy velvet blinds covering the boardroom windows automatically rolled down, plunging the massive room into dim, theatrical shadows. A high-definition projector dropped silently from the ceiling, illuminating the blank white wall at the far end of the long table. "You took pictures, yeah?" Jeremiah asked softly, a terrifying, icy calmness in his voice. "But you forgot to smile for the video." The crystal-clear time-stamped security footage began to play across the massive wall. The audio was pristine, echoing loudly through the silent boardroom. Andre watched in absolute paralyzed horror as the video showed Vernon pulling empty pill bottles from a canvas bin and scattering them across his father's bathroom floor. He watched his wife, the mother of his only child, open the refrigerator and pour milk all over the clean linoleum. He heard Vernon explicitly tell Nia to make it look dangerous, and then he watched her intentionally ignite a dish towel on the gas stove, creating a lethal fire hazard in a deliberate attempt to frame an innocent man. The footage skipped forward, showing them celebrating in the luxury SUV. Andre heard his wife laughing maliciously, talking about firing Jordan's speech therapist. He heard her explicitly state that she was going to use the stolen medical money to pay for a new marble kitchen remodel. The video ended, freezing on a high-definition image of Vernon and Nia smiling greedily, completely unaware of their impending doom. The bright overhead lights in the boardroom snapped back on, blindingly harsh. Andre pushed his chair forcefully away from the table, stumbling backward, looking at Nia like she was a terrifying, unrecognizable monster. "How could you do this?" Andre choked out, hot tears streaming rapidly down his face. "He is my father, Nia. He paid for Jordan to speak. He paid for the roof over our heads, and you tried to lock him in a cage for a new kitchen." Nia stood completely frozen, the color draining entirely from her face. Her arrogant posture collapsed as the inescapable, crushing reality of her federal crime finally crashed down upon her. She looked at the three corporate lawyers, and she looked at the undeniable video evidence on the wall, realizing her life of luxury was completely, permanently over. Jeremiah stood up slowly, leaning his heavy hands against the polished mahogany table. He looked at Nia and then he looked at Vernon, his face an absolute mask of cold, unforgiving justice. "You thought I was just a tired old man." Jeremiah began, his voice echoing with deep, resonant power. "You looked at my flannel shirts and my calloused hands, and you saw nothing but weakness. You saw a massive target, someone you could easily step over to fund your pathetic, empty lives." He walked around the edge of the table, his heavy boots making a slow, deliberate sound on the thick carpet. Vernon backed away, pressing his spine against the cold glass wall, sweating profusely in his tailored suit. "You are a hollow shell of a man," Vernon, Jeremiah said, stopping just a few feet away from him. "You parade around in leased cars, and you buy your family with offshore mob money because you have absolutely no genuine value to offer them. And when your own reckless gambling caught up with you, you did not stand tall and take the hit. You tried to throw an innocent grandfather to the wolves and steal the very foundation of his life's work." Vernon opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely, utterly broken, stripped of every single illusion of grandeur. Jeremiah turned away from the trembling coward and looked directly at Nia. She was sobbing uncontrollably now, her expensive makeup running down her face in thick, dark streaks. She reached out a shaking hand toward her husband, but Andre recoiled violently, completely disgusted by her very presence. "And you, Nia," Jeremiah said, his voice dropping to a sharp, sorrowful whisper. "I paid for the roof over your head. I paid for the food on your table. I paid thousands of dollars every single month so your son could learn how to speak and build a beautiful life. I never asked for a parade, and I never asked for your gratitude. I only asked for basic human respect. But entitlement is a terrible, blinding disease, Nia. It convinced you that my silent sacrifices were just your fundamental rights. It convinced you that a new marble kitchen was worth more than my freedom. I'm sorry," Nia choked out, falling to her knees on the pristine carpet. "Please, Jeremiah, I'm so incredibly sorry. We will leave the house today. We will never ask you for another dime. Just please do not send us to prison. You are not sorry for what you did?" Jeremiah corrected her, coldly looking down at her kneeling form. "You are only sorry that the hidden cameras were rolling and your luxury credit cards are permanently declined." Jeremiah looked across the room at his son. Andre was standing in the corner looking completely destroyed and entirely lost. "Andre," Jeremiah said softly, the anger finally leaving his voice, replaced by a heavy, profound sadness. "I loved you enough to build an empire for you, but I failed you because I never made you carry a single brick. I let you live in a soft, consequence-free world, and it made you incredibly weak. You let this toxic man and this greedy woman dictate your entire existence. You have a lot of hard work to do, son, if you ever want to be a real father to Jordan." Andre nodded slowly, hot tears falling freely from his eyes, accepting the harsh, undeniable truth of his own failures. "I know, Dad." Andre whispered brokenly, "I'm so incredibly sorry." Jeremiah turned back to the mahogany table and gave a single sharp nod to his lead litigator. David picked up his secure phone and pressed a single button. The heavy wooden doors of the penthouse boardroom swung open for the final time. Two federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with thick yellow letters on the back marched directly into the room. Their faces were entirely grim, and their movements were highly tactical and completely efficient. Vernon, the lead agent, barked loudly, stepping forward with heavy steel handcuffs glinting in the bright overhead light. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and massive financial extortion." Vernon let out a pathetic, high-pitched whine as the agents grabbed his arms, spinning him around aggressively. They slammed him face first against the cold glass wall, kicking his legs apart and snapping the heavy steel cuffs tightly around his wrists. The satisfying click of the locking mechanism echoed loudly through the silent boardroom. You have the right to remain silent, the second agent recited, coldly patting down his tailored suit pockets, pulling out the cheap burner phone, and tossing it onto the table as direct evidence. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Nia screamed a horrible gut-wrenching sound as she watched her father being dragged away like a common street criminal. She buried her face in the carpet, sobbing hysterically, realizing her entire world had just burned to the ground. Jeremiah stood perfectly still, watching the federal agents escort the desperate gambler out of the boardroom and into the waiting elevator. The heavy wooden doors closed behind them, leaving the room entirely quiet once again. The trial of justice was completely over, and the total ruin of their arrogant, entitled lives was absolutely absolute. 6 months passed slowly, and the bitter, freezing winter finally faded into a quiet, warm spring across the sprawling city of Atlanta. The massive suburban mansion, with its grand marble kitchen and its towering, echoing ceilings, was seized by the federal bank and sold at a very public, highly humiliating auction. The shiny, leased luxury cars were quickly repossessed, towed away into the dark, unforgiving night, leaving completely empty driveways behind. For Vernon, the harsh, brutal reality of a federal penitentiary rapidly replaced his glamorous fake life of offshore loans and incredibly expensive bourbon. He now sat in a cold, unforgiving concrete cell, entirely stripped of his heavy gold watch, his tailored silk suits, and his arrogant pride. He wore a scratchy, bright orange jumpsuit, and he spent his incredibly long, miserable days folding rough cotton towels in the hot, steaming prison laundry facility. The violent Chicago syndicate never got their massive payment, but the elite federal prosecutors ensured that Vernon would not see the outside world for at least 10 incredibly long years. Nia and Andre were forced to pack their remaining meager belongings and move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment located on the noisy, crowded side of the city. The massive, invisible financial safety net that Jeremiah had quietly woven for them over the years was completely permanently gone. Nia was forced to trade her expensive designer purses and her endless platinum credit cards for a faded, incredibly stiff blue uniform. She now worked grueling 10-hour shifts at a crowded, chaotic retail store. She spent her days standing on her aching feet, folding cheap synthetic clothes for incredibly rude, demanding customers. The absolute crushing humiliation of her new, impoverished reality was a heavy, suffocating blanket, but it was the exact bitter medicine she so desperately needed to swallow. Andre took on incredibly long, physically exhausting hours working terrible double shifts at a local massive logistics warehouse. His soft hands grew thick and calloused. His back ached constantly from lifting heavy boxes, and his eyes carried dark, incredibly heavy beat. But every single Friday afternoon, Andre took his wrinkled, hard-earned paycheck and walked directly to the local bank. He cashed the small check, placed 8 crisp $100 bills into a plain white envelope, and drove his old beaten-up sedan to the private speech therapy clinic. He handed the thick envelope across the receptionist counter, paying for Jordan out of his very own pocket with money he had earned from his very own sweat. It was a brutal, incredibly difficult life filled with endless budgeting and massive regrets. But for the very first time in their entire marriage, they were finally standing on their own 2 feet, carrying their own heavy weight without stealing from an old man. Far away from the loud, chaotic noise of the busy city, Jeremiah sat peacefully on the old, familiar wooden swing resting on his pale yellow front porch. The sweet, comforting smell of blooming honeysuckle completely filled the warm, breezy afternoon air. Saturday mornings belonged entirely and exclusively to his wonderful grandchildren. Jordan sat quietly on the wooden porch steps, reading a thick, incredibly advanced chapter book out loud, his speech sounding incredibly clear and perfectly steady. Aaliyah, his highly energetic 5-year-old granddaughter, was sitting comfortably on the soft green grass, drawing a messy, beautifully colorful picture of a tall, strong oak tree. Jeremiah listened to the sweet rhythmic sound of his young grandson reading, feeling a deep, profound warmth spread entirely through his chest. He reached deep into his faded flannel pocket, pulling out a fresh, sweet-smelling block of cedar wood and his trusty, incredibly sharp carving knife. He began to slowly whittle away the rough, uneven edges, shaping the raw wood with slow, practiced, entirely loving patience. Grandpa Jordan said softly, closing his heavy book and looking up with bright, incredibly curious eyes. Dad said we cannot go to Aspen for Christmas this year because things are just too expensive right now and he has to work extra shifts at the warehouse. Are you going to be sad that we are staying home for the holidays? Jeremiah stopped carving the cedar wood and looked down at the young, innocent boy. No, Jordan. Jeremiah replied gently, a soft, incredibly genuine smile touching his weathered lips. I'm not sad about that, not even a little bit. The very best Christmases in the entire world are not found in fancy ski lodges or bought with expensive platinum credit cards. They are built right here on a quiet porch surrounded by the people who truly honestly love you. Jeremiah looked out at the bright green lawn, thinking quietly about the massive, impenetrable corporate trust resting safely in the downtown bank vault. He had completely restructured the entire massive financial empire. The money was no longer a blind, endless fountain for entitled, greedy adults to selfishly abuse. He had legally transferred every single penny into an ironclad, heavily protected educational and medical trust designated solely for Jordan and Aaliyah. It was a massive financial fortress, absolutely protected from their parents' past mistakes, and strictly managed by the elite, unforgiving legal team. The immense wealth would easily pay for their future college tuition, their highest quality health care, and their very first homes. But they would not see a single solitary dime of it until they fully learned the absolute fundamental value of hard, honest work. I have a very special secret to tell you, Jordan. Jeremiah said quietly, leaning forward slightly on the creaking wooden swing. You and your little sister are going to have a very bright, incredibly safe future ahead of you, but you have to promise me something very important today. You have to promise me that you will always work hard for what you want, and that you will always respect the people around you no matter how much money you might have in your pocket. I promise, Grandpa Jordan said incredibly seriously, nodding his small, earnest head. Jeremiah leaned back against the swing, listening to Aaliyah giggle happily in the soft grass, feeling a profound, absolute sense of quiet, peaceful closure. He had been forced to make an incredibly painful, highly difficult choice months ago. He had intentionally amputated a toxic, incredibly greedy branch from his own family tree, watching his only son suffer through the agonizing, heavy consequences of his own weakness. But looking at his two beautiful grandchildren, now completely safe and happy in the warm afternoon sun, he knew he had made the only right decision possible. Sometimes real love requires you to step back completely and let people fall down entirely on their own. Sometimes true, honest generosity means closing your wallet tightly so a person can finally learn how to build their own character from the absolute bottom up. Jeremiah had spent his entire life trying desperately to shield his son from the harsh, freezing storms of reality. But he finally realized that the difficult storm was exactly what Andre needed to finally grow strong, deep roots. The loud, arrogant noise of Vernon and Nia was entirely permanently gone from his daily life. The terrible manipulation, the fake crocodile tears, and the endless greedy demands for luxury trips had all been completely washed away. In their place was a quiet, incredibly honest peace, anchored deeply in genuine love and absolute, unwavering integrity. True wealth is not loudly paraded, but quietly anchored in respect and integrity. When entitlement blinds you to the sacrifices of those who paved your way, the foundation crumbles. Justice is inevitable for those who mistake quiet grace for weakness, proving that genuine power never needs to shout.